It was a strict policy. Any late submission of Professor Alastair Finch's assignments, even by a single second, would result in a deduction of 10% of the final grade. And in the end, Alastair himself would taste his own medicine. Professor Finch's rule was simple. All research papers had to be submitted electronically by precisely 5 p.m. on the due date. No extensions were granted. If the system clock showed 5 and 1 second, the penalty was automatic. Poor Emily Carter, who'd lost power for 20 minutes, was docked 10%. The rules are the rules, Professor Finch had said, stone-faced. Then there was David Miller, whose internet had died for a whole minute. I am not here to accommodate your technical difficulties, he'd stated, before dinging 10% off. Professor Finch was likely exhibiting the fundamental attribution error by blaming external circumstances rather than the situation. My own final research paper was on the line. I was in a scholarship program, and a grade reduction meant potentially losing $500 and the opportunity to present my thesis at a national conference. I started preparing days in advance. I checked the campus Wi-Fi strength and downloaded all necessary software. On the day of the deadline, I arrived at the computer lab at 3 p.m., double-checking everything. I uploaded a preliminary version to the system to test the timing. I set up 3 different clocks, one on my laptop, one on my phone, and the lab computer, all synced to the atomic clock. I took screenshots every half hour, documenting the time and progress. 4:30 p.m., the lab was mostly empty, just me and a few other students. 4:45 p.m., my heart began to race. I refreshed the submission page again. 4:50 p.m., the final edits were in place. I held my breath. 4:55 p.m., I saved the document one last time. 4:58 p.m., I hovered my mouse over the submit button, waiting. 5 p.m., the deadline. Professor Finch was nowhere to be seen. 5:02 p.m., still no Professor Finch. Panic began to set in. 5:05 p.m., students began to murmur. Professor Finch's absence was unusual. 5:10 p.m., Professor Finch still hadn't arrived. I began to feel a strange sense of anticipation. Finally, at 5:15 p.m., Professor Finch strolled into the lab, a casual air about him. "Terribly sorry, everyone," he announced. "My car wouldn't start, had to wait for a jump." I approached him calmly, holding my laptop open. "Professor Finch," I began, referencing section 3.2 of the syllabus. "The submission deadline was 5 p.m. Other students gathered around, phones at the ready, filming. "And as per your policy," I continued, "submission after the deadline results in a 10% grade penalty." Just then, the head of the department, Dr. Eleanor Vance, walked in, holding her own phone. "Alastair," she said quietly, but firmly, "I've checked the server logs, and your grade submission for this paper was logged at 5:16 p.m. Professor Finch was then penalized 10% of his final grade. Professor Finch had just experienced the power of reciprocity. He was given back his own medicine.